Public Works Department announced a first for the federal government. It has drafted a guide to help it accommodate transgender employees. The guide is described as a one-stop shop of resources for employees who have transitioned or are in the process of doing so. It's also, though, a blueprint for bosses and other employees to nurture an inclusive and respectful workplace. Public Works now hopes other federal departments will follow suit. So what set this move in motion, and how will it benefit federal transgender employees? Kate Hart is a transgender passport officer with Service Canada, and she played a big role in developing the Public Works new guidelines. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So it was, let's start with a little bit of your story and how it informed the work that you did here. It was 2008 when you decided you were going to transition.
Yes.
And you were already a passport officer.
I was working for passports at the time. I wasn't quite yet a passport officer, but yes.
And so what was that process like? I mean, that would be hard in any workplace, obviously. What was it like? Did you feel like you had support? Did you encounter problems?
Surprisingly, I encountered very few, if any, problems. My transition happened slightly different, I guess. I used my union and we decided on what we called a top-down approach, and we disclosed to the Chief Executive Officer at the time of Passport Canada, who then it filtered down to every layer of management that way. I had great support in my workplace. My managers were very supportive. That's not always the case, sadly. But yeah, at work, you know, my office went to the trouble of organizing and paying overtime for an after-hours meeting to discuss things. I brought in the head of the gender clinic in Edmonton to do a presentation to the staff, and we went from there. And truly, my workmates were very accepting. I've had no issues with the staff. And yeah, I am facing the public every day. I haven't.
Yeah, I was going to say, what about the customers or the clients?
I certainly haven't had anybody overtly drop slurs or anything like that. Have I had people at my counter that were visibly uncomfortable? Yes. But, you know, it's never been outright slurs or anything like that.
So it sounds like this went okay for you.
Oh,
and
yes.
That was already back in 2008.
Yes,
so why is this guide needed then? If you were able to manage it in the public service, why do you think it's needed in this department and maybe others?
Well, the way the working group looked at it is it's an education for everyone, from the trans person to the manager to all your peer employees. And I think that's a wonderful approach to have, because in some cases, and I won't name names, I have talked to other trans people in the federal service who have had roadblocks thrown in their way at every step.
What kind of roadblocks?
Things like, oh, you can put this off. Or maybe we can transfer you to another area because the manager just didn't want to deal with it. So,
like career things, things that would affect their career.
Absolutely.
Right.
So having something like this, which is a guide, you know, it's a guide, it's not a policy or anything, it's a guide to help managers, other employees, and the trans person navigate everything that needs to be done to do the best you can to have a successful transition within the federal public service.
And what's the best part of that? Like, what is the thing in the guide that you think is the most important for managers to understand as someone's going through this?
That the process needs to be driven by the trans person, not the manager.
What does that mean?
In some cases, and again, not my own, and it's anecdotal from friends.
Sure.
They've had the managers, they'll go and disclose to the manager, and the manager wants, oh, let's get the email out today, let's introduce you to the staff today.
Right.
And
you're like, no, it's at my speed. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
And I think that's one of the most important things in that guide, is that the process needs to be driven by the trans person, and some may wish to do it quick, some may wish to do it slow, but everything is guided by that. It's involving human resources right away. And, part of the guide also, gives a little list for the trans person. Okay, you're going to need to do your credentials, do your security clearance, do this, do your pension, do
things you might not think about.
things that you don't immediately think about
right.
because you did them when you got hired and you just don't think about them after that.
yeah.
So there's very good elements in that, but it's also, that is a good guide for the manager. It's like, have you thought of? And also good for when they're talking about disclosure to the staff, if leave is required, all sorts of things.
Right. So what is your hope? You as I said, I mean, I think it's remarkable that you had such a good experience. I don't know if that's typical.
It's anomalous. Yeah, it's not typical.
So what is your hope then, that by contributing to this and helping the department come up with this, what is your hope?
My hope is that this will spread to as many federal departments as we can. My ultimate hope, and this comes out of, I was on the bargaining team dealing with Treasury Board, and we dealt with a lot of Treasury Board directives. I would love to see Treasury Board adopt this as formal policy. That's just a personal hope, because once Treasury Board adopts it as policy, it's policy for all departments. Not just a guideline anymore, actual policy, and that would be a wonderful thing.
What would prevent them from doing that? What do you think is holding them back?
Nothing I think would prevent Treasury Board from doing it, and I think the folks at PSPC, like I said, have done an amazing job with this, and they certainly had the support of their senior management, which is awesome. Treasury Board, I'm sure, will look at it now that it's been launched, and like I said, I hope they will adopt it as formal policy.
What if they were to do that? If it became a government policy to sort of do these respectful things in the workplace, what kind of message do you think that would send to private businesses, if the government and the civil service were to take this kind of lead role?
Well, and that's kind of one of the reasons I hope that Treasury Board will adopt it as policy, is because we are leaders in the workplace setting. And I think certainly large corporations, and hopefully all the small and even the mom and pop businesses, would look at this and go, okay, I understand more now. Having read this, I actually understand more now. And okay, I'm not afraid to deal with a trans employee. And I think in the long term, that's where I hope it will go. I hope it'll spread. I hope it sends the message to business that trans employees are like every other employee. We're no different.
Yeah. Okay. Kate Hart, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming in.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
The federal government has also just announced it's making other changes that affect people who don't identify with either gender. Today, the Department of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship announced it will update documents like Canadian passports to include another option to indicate a person's sex. Starting August 31st, people can select an X instead of an M or an F, meaning their gender is unspecified. The department is the first federal department to introduce such measures.